What's brand? So brand is basically how you project your company to the world. So, there's a lot of different ways that you could articulate what brand is. We worked on Sony Playstation, so we actually responsible for turning Sony Playstation blue. So what we did do was we brought the PS, the iconic PS mark, we brought that back. That really was the master brand. When we talk about brand building, you want to set those kind of rules and set those tools, but you need to use them consistently in order to, raise awareness and kind of build your brand.
How many people search for things? So just for example, if we want to go into the business of clothing, we see that there is a market between 50 pounds to 70 pounds where people are searching for something, but they're not quite finding it. Both of us come up with the plan that let's fill that gap in the industry. How would we create a brand?
Building a really strong brand takes time. So it's kind of investing in those brand campaigns and those brand assets to contribute to that long-term brand equity, rather than just focusing solely on the short term. The Dave Channel case study, which again is in the recording that is to follow, but that was quite an interesting project to make sure that we don't alienate the core audience, but we also recruit new audiences that kind of see the sort of fresh new branding and want to come and check it out, really.
Ladies and gentlemen, ladies.
Now, this is a special conversation. Peter Allinson is the head of design at UKTV, and that's a company of BBC Studios. He leads a great team that shapes our ideas and aspirations about the businesses and the products that we use, and that we call the art of branding. I won't say much because I want you to enjoy the conversation ahead. And one more thing, Peter has been kind enough to create a video for all of us with his insights on case studies of branding of various companies. That's a little goldmine of thoughts from the master himself. It is posted as a separate video. Happy learning from it. Enjoy. Hi, Peter. Welcome to the podcast. And it's great to have you here. And we talked about brands and brand building, and we have been discussing about it. And I want this to be an amazing podcast where people, or the new generation of people who are coming up and the companies who are looking to do brand building, they can fall back to this podcast and they can learn a lot about from here. So please, welcome.
Thank you very much, Sanjit. No, it's a pleasure to be here and to talk to you about brands and brand building. So hopefully I can bring a bit of enlightenment to your podcast.
Amazing. So do you want to tell us about yourself first, where you're working and, how did you come into this world? Why did you choose this exact field? Did this happen ASAP, or, was this that you thought from your childhood? How did you come into this?
Yeah, so I guess, well, at the moment I am head of design and I work across all of the creative campaigns, all of the design work that's needed, but also all of the brand work. So if we were to do kind of a rebrand, or if we were to do any sort of brand building exercises through branding campaigns and things like that, I would lead those projects. But as head of design, I have a group of creatives and designers around me. I'm the project lead, or the sort of team lead. But I have a series of very talented people that work with me to kind of build the brands and work on the campaigns. So I work at UKTV, which is part of BBC Studios. So it's part of the wider BBC group, and we're essentially a set of 7 brands, which are TV channels, but we also have our on-demand streaming service called UKTV Play, which in itself is going to be rebranded fairly soon. That went into it was a press announcement quite recently. So next year is going to be quite busy in terms of rebranding and building our own kind of brand next year, which is really exciting. But I guess coming back to your question, sort of how I got here. So I've always had I'm very creative minded. So I've always been interested in movies. I've always been interested in the world of design and creative. And it was only really when I started university and I did a graphic design degree that I just totally fell in love with that field. And I did 3 years of graphic design, which then led on to a master's degree in graphic design and communication. And that master's degree was very much tailored towards the professional industry. So we were actually working on live briefs. We were working with, real clients, actual agencies, in London. So it was a real kind of baptism of fire, but I absolutely loved it. So I thankfully was the team lead of one of the master degree teams that were formed, and we won a lot of the briefs that were set that year. And at the end of it, we won the MA Team of the Year, and I got MA Designer of the Year. So I felt like it was really worthwhile. And I think, the way that they structured it, where we actually worked on live briefs and we worked with clients and we presented work back to agencies, it kind of gave the rest of the cohort a really good experience of what is to come. And it was through that experience that I actually got introduced to somebody at the BBC, and I managed to get some work as a freelance designer working with the BBC. I did a lot of kind of TV graphics and a lot of design work for some specific TV shows. And it was only a little bit later down the line that I realized that I was working with a guy called Alan, and he turned out to be Alan Yentob, who was actually the creative director at the BBC. So, even my kind of first job getting that freelance gig at the BBC, I was working with somebody very high up in the organization and very well regarded. So that in itself was quite incredible. And then from my university days and sort of doing more freelance with the BBC, I went to a design and branding agency in Camden Town in London, and that's where we started to work with some really big clients. So we worked with Sky Television in the UK and in Italy. We worked on Sony Playstation. So we actually were responsible for turning Sony Playstation blue, because before they were black with, these streams of multicolored lines. And Sony Playstation actually wanted something that they could own, a color they could own, and actually build a brand that felt a bit more distinctive and confident. So I was part of the team that turned them blue. There was a lot more work involved in that project in terms of bringing the PlayStation brand to the fore, but a lot of that was kind of building the foundations of how Sony PlayStation should look and how it should feel, and then handing it over to the global teams to then start to use those to really build the brand. And that was way back in, what was it, 2008, 2009, and they're still using the assets to this day. So that's quite incredible, and it sort of shows the idea of investing in brand and brand equity. And then from those agency days, I went into TV advertising. So we did TV commercials. I worked in the entertainment area for a few years, and that's where I became a team leader as head of design, and that was in Soho, so again in London. And then from that job, I moved over to UKTV, where I am now as head of design and sort of building the creative department from the ground up over the last 8 years or so.
That's a great journey. I have so many questions while you were speaking, and so many questions, and I'll ask them slowly. But the first and foremost question is, you have worked in this industry from long, what exactly is brand for you?
What's brand? So brand is basically how you project your company to the world. So, there's a lot of different ways that you could articulate what brand is. There's brand identity, and that's essentially, the basics of a brand name, a logo, what the color palette is. So like, for example, as I was saying, for PlayStation, we defined blue as their brand color. It's things like typography. So what kind of type styles or what kind of typeface you use for your brand, and then other design elements around that. It could be in the digital world, it could be things like buttons, or it could be, different shapes that you instantly sort of recognize as part of that brand. So I think brand identity is kind of the number one thing when I think of brand. And it's that consistency of those visual assets that help customers sort of recognize and remember the brand. And I think when we talk about brand building, you want to set those kind of rules and set those tools, but you need to use them consistently in order to raise awareness and kind of build your brand, and for customers and consumers to recognize it and feel trusted. But there's loads of other things that come with brand. There's brand positioning, where you position yourself in the market. It's brand messaging in how do you have a clear and consistent message to your target audience. It's brand values, it's your mission, it's your personality. It's things like content marketing, so how you produce content to project your brand. It's your social media or your online presence, so that you're constantly engaging with your audience as well. And it's investing in brand equity. Essentially, it's kind of building a really strong brand takes time, so it's kind of investing in those brand campaigns and those brand assets to contribute to that long-term brand equity, rather than just focusing solely on the short term.
To summarize it, is it storytelling? Is it telling your story to the world, or why you're working to connect people together? Because brand building from a marketing standpoint is it's similar, but I think you get data from the marketing team as well. What's the demography, how many people are going to use it, how the business should increase, what are their core values, and do they stand true to those core values? Because we can talk about many case studies, like you mentioned about Sony and all. I have all those questions, and I've heard that. Does this help you that marketeers create a kind of a neurolingual programming where they speak about the same thing, and they design the same thing, like in colors and all, and they mention that if you keep on speaking this, and if people are going to keep on consuming this, they're gonna associate with the brand, they're gonna feel that that's their brand. And many companies do this again and again. Do you get insights from brand marketing team, people who have done research and all?
Yeah, absolutely. We always, we have brand trackers. We track our brand activity through creative campaigns. I think there's always a need to kind of measure and analyze. So, using key performance indicators to track, the impact of your brand building efforts. We need to continuously analyze the data that we have to really understand what's working and what needs improvement. And I think, when it comes to brand and brand building, you also need to be able to kind of monitor all of that, but also adapt. So I think, continuously monitoring, particularly, the feedback that you're getting, but also things like market trends and, obviously your brand's performance, but just be ready to, adapt and pivot your brand strategy as needed to stay as relevant as you can and, competitive in the market. I think that's the really key thing, is that yes, it's always about making sure that you're tracking what you're doing and seeing if it's performing, but just having that flexibility to pivot and adapt where needed. And I think it's also really important these days to recognize the role of online presence and social media in brand building. It's all well and good kind of listening to, or kind of gathering all that data and just using data as a way to answer questions and move on to the next thing. But actually, I think, there is a bit of a human element involved in brand building. And I think, just kind of putting your brand out there and actually hearing the conversation and reacting to, your target audience and listening to what they want and what they need. And also just making sure that, you can connect with your audience in a meaningful way, and share your stories to a global audience that want to listen. So I think it's a kind of balance of reacting to the data, which is very important. That's facts and figures. That's telling you, is it performing well or is it performing badly? But also getting that human response from your target audience and that kind of immediate response to what you're doing, so that it's not just always crunching numbers and sort of reacting to data. It's reacting to people as well.
Great. So there's an intuition factor in between as well. So connecting the dots, Sony's color, PlayStation's color changed to blue. What's the story behind it? How did you and your team come to it?
So that was it was at a time when the gaming market was going through quite a lot of change in terms of brand building and
Yeah.
rebranding and kind of finding something distinctive in the market. Obviously, that was at a time where the gaming industry is booming. The games are getting better. Kids want more and more platforms to play on.
The
So
CPU power was becoming much bigger. The
it
central
was,
process.
yeah.
The
I mean,
computers, the gaming Xbox and PlayStations were kind of becoming supercomputers in themselves. They were like very
they
fast.
were.
Yeah.
They were. I mean, I grew up in I had a Nintendo, and then I had the Super Nintendo, and then I had the N64, and I was obsessed with the Nintendo 64. I was on GoldenEye for hours. Me and my brother were playing FIFA. So, I kind of grew up on games. I don't have any time now because I'm married with 2 children, but it was it was a dream job really, because it was at a time when, like we were saying, the computers and the games were getting so good that the competition was becoming quite fierce. And, Xbox had recently rebranded and they had become green. There was Nintendo that was typically red and white. They were mostly this kind of clean, white, safe brand. It's mostly child-based games. Whereas PlayStation kind of had this black brand, and it just felt a bit confused. Didn't feel very confident. It felt a bit dated. So there was a brief that went out just saying, we need a bit of more distinctiveness in the market. So, we went away and we kind of looked at the market as it was. It's obviously changing at rates, so we had to kind of keep up with what was going on. But what we really identified was that blue was quite a typically sort of technology based color anyway. It's also, blue's quite a trusted color, but it wasn't really being used in the gaming space much. They were going for quite sort of bright, other primary colors, and blue wasn't really being used that much. And we thought, that's a really good area and opportunity for them to jump on and kind of own that color. And we were also quite conscious that, we had to act quite quickly, because things quite change quite fast in the world of branding. But the other thing we identified was actually the PlayStation brands. They started to launch, PlayStation 2, PlayStation Portable. They had PlayStation Vita. They had all of these other sub brands, but they all had very different brand identities. So what we did do was we brought the iconic PS mark. We brought that back. That really was the master brand, which then sat with all of their brands in a bit more of a sort of structural brand positioning. So it was a bit of a sort of shift change in that we gave them a new color, but we also brought a bit of heritage back into their brand, and actually used the brand equity that they already had in their new brands to follow. The other thing we brought back into their toolkit was the shapes that they have. So obviously on the controller they have the square, the circle, the cross, and the triangle, and they used that in some of their work, but they didn't really use it very confidently. Whereas we then brought that in as a really distinctive brand element. And we actually rendered it in glass. It was in 3D glass, and they all kind of flew towards the screen. You may have seen, I think they ran that for about 10 years on a lot of their TV adverts. But so yeah, we basically started to really build a more of a confident brand with a set of brand tools that they could then use confidently across all of their global brands.
Talking about colors, lots of audience here may want to know why some colors are picked up. Like you mentioned, Nintendo picked up red and blue. It was kids' games majorly, so they thought maybe that's a good color. But maybe do you think that was a good color they picked up, or they might have picked something else?
I think for Nintendo, I think, yeah, absolutely. I think, it's a kind of bright, bright red and white. And, my kids have a Nintendo Switch now. And I always know that, Nintendo is quite a trusted family gaming brand. So I don't know whether that's necessarily coming through in their color of choice. I mean, red is usually synonymous with things like excitement and, youthfulness and being bold. So, I think all of those kind of line up with the brand values of Nintendo. It's a very youthful brand. So, but this comes into things like color theory and why some brands have picked certain colors. It's things like NHS in the UK is blue because it's all about, trust, and
Yeah.
it's all about strength. When it's something like Amazon, or EasyJet, they have orange, which is all about being kind of friendly and cheerful. So, I think color kind of has a bit of an emotional response to people, but at the same time, you know, I think it's also looking at the market and finding areas that perhaps haven't been utilized. So, kind of staying on the theme of color, we did a bit of a market review of things like, on-demand streaming platforms, and what we found was there's loads of streamers that use kind of blue and, purples and sort of darker shades. Obviously, Netflix is
Hmm.
red, and they've kind of cornered that market in terms of red in the streaming service. But, you know when you start to actually look at the streaming services out there, they all look very similar. It's a teal or a blue or a dark blue. It's kind of in that world. It's very similar actually to the PlayStation
I
colors
think
that we've been
I think
talking about.
Netflix picked it up from the curtain, of the shows that used to happen in theaters. I think Netflix picked that color from there.
Yeah, I agree. I think and even their kind of intro where you're sort of going through those lines, it's almost like a kind of theatre curtain
Yeah.
opening to sort of give you the show and, taking you into the theatre or the screen. So yeah, I think there's a lot of psychology around use of colour in terms of brand building. But like I say, colour is one part of a series of tools that build up a brand identity.
Do you think, Microsoft changed it to green? Do you think that it's played good for them? The green is, what do we consider green with? Nature, prosperity,
Yeah.
maybe?
Well, I think green is all about growth, I guess, and yeah, there is obviously nature and there's sort of peacefulness, but I guess green, as people associate that with growth. So you know,
It's also
that could have
kryptonite.
been a reason. Yes, exactly, exactly.
It felt like
Um,
kryptonite when Microsoft X had that. It felt like kind of kryptonite, when it used to move in that. I associated it with kryptonite. I was like, okay, no, let Superman not be near it. But
well,
okay,
exactly.
if what would be your favorite color? Maybe, the kind of brands which you look at, maybe there's a color like yellow or something, orange or something that you immediately connect to.
Yeah, I mean, I think uh, I respond to brands, how they sit in the market and how they kind of project their brand. I think I don't ever have a favorite color. I think if they use it in a particular way that actually interests me and, makes me want to invest in the brand or engage with the brand, then that's good enough for me. I think, when it comes to brands, I like simplicity. I like something that is really confident and simple. I always come back to Apple as one of the brands that I admire the most. I have an iPhone. I work off an iMac, so I'm very much an Apple user. But what I really like about Apple is that their brand identity is known for its minimalist design. Everything's very slick and sleek. There's those sort of clean lines. It's very uncluttered, and I think without kind of honing down on just color, I think almost their lack of color and their simplicity and their sort of confidence in their branding is something that I really respond to. It's something that it just feels like they're confident, and I'm sort of buying into something that is sort of trusted and knows what they are. And I guess Apple are synonymous with innovation and cutting edge technology, and I think in a lot of cases their design and their functionality does the talking for them. And also they've kind of created this instantly recognizable brand identity without the need of a lot of color. So I think when it comes to brands, I sort of admire those things more, more than say a logo design or a color. I think it's how they've really honed their brand identity and how they've crafted it and sort of used it to be more consumer facing.
Great. So yeah, Apple is minimalistic, but at the same time, in their website, they use lots of color. If you scroll down, they use lots of color as well. So earlier, I remember, if you remember those Apple websites, which were like Web 2.0 with
Yeah.
glossy, like light gray, they didn't use much colors at that time, only an iPod page or something. But now they have started using lots of colors. Do you think, that's a shift? They see that people associate lots of colors with them?
I think so. I think they still stay very rooted in simplicity. So even on their website, just their kind of layout and the way that they present information, it's still using that simplicity of design. But yes, I think I think because they are quite a neutral brand, they are able to inject more color into other things. So for example, they have those annual events where they go up on the stage and they reveal the next big thing and they reveal the next big product. And I've noticed that over time they've injected a rainbow of colors. There's multiple colors in there and it feels really bright and vibrant. And I think that's probably almost their simple design and brand identity allows them to do that, because they can inject color into other things like those presentations that they do, like their web pages if they choose to do so. Apple TV Plus as well. Like me and my wife watch quite a lot of stuff on Apple TV Plus, and I'm quite surprised. Their UI is not the most intuitive, but it still kind of feels quite slick, and it still feels quite Apple, if you like. And even on those portals or on those pages, there's not a huge amount of color. So I do think Apple have kind of positioned themselves to almost be this very confident, simple brand. But when they want to have those moments where they really want to make an impact, they can start to bring more vibrancy and more color into the brand.
Yeah, I think it all started with when they came out with Apple Watches page, and they put lots of colors because there were lots of straps in those watches.
Yeah.
And eventually they started using it in other pages, if I can remember correctly. Yeah.
Well, they
you
started
have
because they started. I guess when it came to products, like you're saying with the Apple Watch, when they released things like the iPod, that was just sleek white. Like
Yeah.
you could just buy it in white. And then when they released the iPhone, they were typically black. And then I guess over time they've started to introduce, a kind of variety of colors that you can buy, iPads and iPhones in. So I think it's kind of, they've almost built their sort of brand foundations. It feels like a trusted, simple brand, but now they can start to inject color. And, I guess it kind of helps talking to the youth of today that, want that variety and kind of don't want to just either pick black or white. They want to have a choice. So yeah, I think Apple have been really good at that.
Speaking of which, you have created a case study for us. Brand is also there to convince people. Is there a story that you may share with us where you created a kind of a brand and you convinced people that to use it? Or obviously there is a marketing factor to it, where marketing team comes up with taglines or some things that people really connect to the story. Do you have a story to share with us? If you can, that you convinced through your branding.
Convince the audience through the branding. I mean, I think one piece that we did recently, I'm not sure whether you're familiar with the Dave channel, but it's a TV channel in the UK. It's a comedy TV channel, and it was launched in 2007, probably because of its kind of quirky name. Calling a TV channel Dave is quite unusual, but it quickly had a following, and it was one of those few TV channels that actually had its own brand identity and its own tone of voice. So it was called the home of witty banter, which is basically the home of, just a very sort of funny tone of voice, essentially. And it just basically started to get a bit stale, and it felt very masculine. It felt like a bit of a sort of man's comedy club. So what we wanted to do was, actually revitalize the brand. And we were essentially tasked with creating a kind of fresh new look and feel for the channel. So what we wanted to do was kind of look at the brand assets that they had. It was all very black and white. It was quite stale and male at the time. So what we did do was we injected, again, kind of coming back to color, we injected a lot more vibrant colors in there to kind of really freshen things up. We started to include background textures rather than just the black and white that we had before. We started to look at introducing different typefaces which had more personality. And we were slightly worried that we had such a sort of strong and dedicated fan base that they just would totally reject it and say that's not my Dave. But actually, once we launched it, there was such a great response, and it just kind of freshened the whole TV channel up and the whole TV branding. And we've used it for a while now, and it's really kind of established itself. So I think it's always going into branding projects. If there is a fan base or if there is a following, it's always something that you should keep in mind about not alienating them. You don't want to completely change it to something that they just will not enjoy or respond to. So it's quite a balance when you work on a branding project. Even if it's a sort of new brand, you need to understand the audience you're talking to and understand what they respond to. So I guess the Dave channel case study, which again is in the recording that is to follow, but that was quite an interesting project to make sure that we don't alienate the core audience, but we also recruit new audiences that kind of see the sort of fresh new branding and want to come and check it out, really.
Ladies and gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen, are you ready? Are you ready? Get ready, dog. Get ready. Get ready.
highly interesting, and of course it's in the case study to follow, but one or two questions about it. So Dave channel had majorly male viewers, right? And you wanted to change the demography. You wanted more females to come in. So somebody might have spoken from the team, hey guys, Dave channel is having lots of male viewers from this age group to this age group, and we want female viewership as well, or maybe kids as well. I'm unsure. But yeah, that it should have more viewership, and so more people would can come. What goes into a brand builder's mind? What went into your mind or your team's mind? That how do you process it? How do you start looking into it? Do you look at the data, or do you look at the intuition? Do you take few days? I just want to know, how do you process all these things? Do you take few days and do you say that, okay, now let's keep on looking at what kind of shows are in it? Let's keep on looking at the logo and the brand by time. And how do you connect all those things with your mind that we would create this, and after this we'll launch campaigns like this, and this is gonna become a brand after a certain period of time when we'll keep on repeating these things. How does it go into your mind?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I suppose with every brand, it's quite different. I think with this particular example, as I say, we have brand trackers, so we kind of look to see how the brand is performing. And I think, we started to see that the performance wasn't quite as strong as it used to be. So what we can do is we can actually take the branding that we currently have on air. We kind of knew that it was on air since 2014, so it had been, the same identity had been used for quite a number of years. So we knew we were getting to a point where we might need to, update this and refresh this. But what we can do, and there's a lot of ways that we can test our brands. So luckily we have a really good insights team at UKTV and BBC Studios, where they can start to gather some of the current brand assets that we have and actually go and talk to audiences. So we can talk to people that watch Dave, people that don't watch Dave. We can watch to sort of heavy viewers or light viewers, and we can get all of this data to kind of understand how they're responding to the branding on air, so that we can start to see, is the black and white that we used. We used a chalkboard background, which was basically like a sort of pub chalkboard texture, and that's where we put jokes on and things like that. Is that holding us back? What elements of the brand identity feel dated? What do people really care about? And we shouldn't change. There was a question around.
And how do you find that? How do you find that what people really care about?
So our insights team would go out to, a number of people. It could be 100, it could be thousands, and we would do a series of tests where we do kind of groups of testing, and we would ask them specific questions and show them specific visual stimulus. And, from those sessions, we would get the data from their responses, and that can take, if it's quick, it can take a couple of weeks. If it's a lot more extensive and we're talking to a wider demographic, then that could take a couple of months. But it's really useful to kind of go out and actually talk to people and how they respond to various elements of your branding. The other alternative is you don't do that, and you kind of talk about what's holding us back internally, like what is something that is just not flexible enough to do, or any sort of brand building activities with. We did actually find internally that having this black and white and this chalkboard background was quite restrictive. We couldn't really do much with it. So, it's a kind of mixed bag of listening to what the audience responds to and what they think is a bit dated or kind of not very relevant anymore, but also having those internal discussions about what would we like to get out the brand, like how will it help us to create more engaging brand campaigns, or how can we create, rather than just having a single typeface that we use consistently, like could we have different weights and different styles so we could be more expressive in our language and in our copy? So it's a real balance of sort of knowing what you need from a creative point of view in-house, and then what you need from an emotional point of view from the audience, and then kind of finding that common ground where everything kind of comes together and works. And sometimes it doesn't work, sometimes you make mistakes and you've got to pivot and you've got to change again. But it's just trying to get as much data and as much understanding of those brands to actually build them and improve them and make them a bit more future fit, rather than just holding on to it for as long as you can. And I know that's quite contradictory when we talk about investing in brand equity, because that often means long-term brand building rather than those short-term gains. But I think in terms of brand building, you do need to stay relevant and stay fresh, and I guess that is part of building the brand in the long term.
So it's amalgamation of both data and intuition, if I may say intuition. And it would be lots of fun doing that. You work along, as you mentioned right at the start, you work along like really, really talented team. You're working from so long, and how do you keep your passion alive? Because it's very, very important to really, really love your work for such a long time. And especially in the times when the markets are changing so fast, we're seeing social media changing so quickly. YouTube was, all about long videos. Now it's all about shorts. They're focusing more on shorts. And at the same time, brands have taken a huge space in people's life in a way that people used to love. It's a neurological thing that people used to love changing their clothes and they used to feel new while doing fashion. But now a lot of it is their mobile phones as well. They want to change. They want to change their mobile phone as soon as a new one comes up, so that they feel relevant in life. They feel that how. So the world is changing quite fastly. How do you keep up with that? How? I'm sure that it's lots of passion that goes in.
Yeah, it is. And you know what? I feel very fortunate that I do a job that I love. Like I was saying at the beginning, I found out quite quickly that I had this passion for creativity and storytelling and design. And I suppose as a kid, I didn't really understand that you could be in a creative team as a full-time job and get paid for it. Like, that's incredible. So I do feel very fortunate that, working in the world of creative, I'm essentially going to work and, we're asked to have fun and come up with ideas. And, sometimes, well, there's a lot of, making sure that you're answering briefs and you're kind of, there's a problem that needs to be solved, or there's a challenge that needs to be met. But, that's all part of idea generation, right? You need to have some kind of barriers for you to play in. It's a bit like, you play in a playground, but there's a fence, right? That's where you play. So, and I feel that with the world of creative, we have these challenges and we have these projects and we have these briefs, and that's where we can start to bring ideas and start to have fun and collaborate. So yeah, I feel very fortunate to be working in this field. And I guess, that it's almost kind of become my hobby. I know that sounds a bit sad. I like other things, but I'm quite happy to sort of at the weekend go on my laptop and kind of learn new things and jump on programs and start to understand, changing trends in the world of creative. I mean, the thing that's kind of I'm really thinking about a lot at the moment is generative AI. So, the world is developing at a rapid rate. There's discussions about artificial intelligence every day. Like there's something new that's been found or something new that's been developed, and there's new programs that are still in beta, but anybody can get their hands on and sort of play with. So that's an area that I'm very interested in and that I'm kind of exploring and experimenting with. It's also a really interesting conversation in my industry because I think when the generative AI discussion started, with Midjourney, where you could generate images using text prompts, it started off and it was a bit rubbish to begin with, and I was like, is there a future in this? But it rapidly got better and better, and actually it's at a rate which it's very impressive. And I'm kind of on a similar path with generative AI animation. So I'm starting to look at things like Runway and Pika, where again it's kind of text prompts to go into animation, and that has serious limitations. Like I think it can only animate a number of seconds, but also it can't do any human movements. It can do smoke really well, it can do clouds really well, it can do elemental things quite well, and atmospheric things quite well, but any kind of movement or acting or anything like that, and it actually falls over quite quickly. So I think there's quite a lot of work in the world of generative AI when it comes to motion. But but again, that's kind of like a whole nother world that's just opened up recently, which I'm excited about exploring and learning more and kind of getting ahead of it rather than, you know, but feeling like I'm being left behind. Because, like I said, when it first came out, I almost rejected it to a certain degree, because I was a bit like, this is going to be terrible for the creative industry. Loads of people are going to be out of work because the computer is going to do the stuff for them. And then it kind of dawned on me that actually this is a really good tool to improve your work, even if it's to generate ideas and sort of to generate images for, to pitch or to present and say, this is what I've got in mind, but we can actually go out and produce it properly. But this is a really good example of what I want to do. I just see it as a really helpful tool. I just don't want people to think that it's going to be the answer to everything. I think it will be something that aids the process rather than becomes the process. So I think in the world of artificial intelligence, there's a lot to learn and a lot to discover. But I feel, as a kind of creative leader, I guess, in our field, I feel quite responsible to understand it and then open that conversation around it and sort of see how people are using it. What are their worries and concerns? How can I start to introduce this and integrate it into the team? Am I allowed to? Are there legal and copyright issues that I need to worry about? So it's kind of like a whole new world that's kind of opened up and needs to be understood. But also it's a whole new world that is changing every week. So you need to stay on top of it. So I do find that area quite exciting, and that kind of fuels my passion even more, really.
Right. It's almost the same with me. I also on weekends I learn so many things. With generative AI, I look at two industries that changed lots of years back. One was cars, automobiles came in, and lots of horses got out of job. People at
Yeah.
that time were saying that, okay, this thing is not going to work, but it worked. And at the same time, there was another industry. We used to have lots of tailors around street corners and all. And then factories came up with huge machines, that were automatically creating clothes for you. So, but both of these industries gave more jobs. They gave more ideas to people.
Yeah.
So I'm quite positive about AI's positive effects. Of course, there would be many bad people who will be using AI to do bad stuff. There has to be more good than bad. So yeah, I think we have to use AI quite well. Speaking of which, you work with lots of passion and you have lots of fun. And I'm asking this question because it's relatable to me. Do you sometimes feel pressurized when you are having lots of fun and then, you're working on a business which is very serious, millions of dollars are being poured into it? Do you feel pressurized that, you're having lots of fun to do? What if something goes bad? How do you handle that? Of course you will be feeling that. How do you handle that?
Yeah, definitely. And I think in our line of work, we're kind of encouraged to think differently. Otherwise, it's just not really going to make much of an impact. We use the word fun, but I almost encourage people to kind of keep that childlike enthusiasm, because I guess
Yeah.
the older you get, the more worried you are of failure, and the more of the guard you put up, and that kind of really restricts you. It restricts your thinking. It restricts your confidence in your abilities. And I think sometimes that kind of naivety from when you were a child is actually a bit of a superpower, because you think about the task at hand and you just want to come up with the best solution for it without worrying too much about things like the business impact or the cost and things like that. But at the same time, we are professionals and we are working for, a big organization. So, we need to approach these projects professionally. I guess, we always have, like I've mentioned before, we always have a brief that needs to be met. So, I guess those ideas and that sort of fun can be quite contained into something that is actually a business need that, needs to answer a brief. So I think, it's really taking on those projects, but also understanding that there is a degree of responsibility. So, almost going away, having those crazy thoughts, seeing what works, what doesn't work, choosing a time to kind of respond to the team or back to the business with some ideas, and then start to bring them into the process as well. And I think, you don't always want to sit on the sidelines and watch other people having fun, right? A lot of people want to join in. They don't want to sit on the sideline. They want to get on the field and start playing. So I think at some points it's actually quite nice to start to bring more people in and, bring stakeholders in and, bring the marketing teams in so that they can actually go on the journey with you and they can start to discover it with you, and everybody else around you has the same passion that you do. So, I think the responsibility on us is to come up with those ideas and actually present them in a way that is useful and that answers a brief or a challenge that's been set. But then there's also that responsibility of kind of sharing it with other people and bringing other people on the journey and listening to them. It's never good to kind of work in silo, because you could just be going on a complete subjective tangent, whereas actually if you start to bring more people in different areas and different backgrounds and a diverse thinking, you can start to create ideas and work that's a lot more rich and less single-minded. And that's also something that I really keep in mind, that I don't want all of my work to just be a projection of myself. I don't want that. I want it to be a projection of lots of people, diverse thinking, different backgrounds, things I wouldn't have thought of before. So it's a real sort of balancing act of controlling the process to a certain degree, but also bringing everybody on the journey with you to get the best possible work, really.
Yeah, it's fun to work with a great team and have different kind of people. Being a leader, that's your leadership style, but what more into it? How do you handle your team on a day-to-day basis? How do you work?
Yeah, so it's a tricky job, and I've always said to, I've been having conversations recently about sort of development of team members and things like that, and I actually think, not everybody wants to be a leader. Not everybody kind of is built to be a leader, and that's okay. That's absolutely fine. It's like, if you're doing the job that you're good at, then that's really good, and it's, you would become senior, or you might become team leader, or whatever that might be. But people don't necessarily need to go into leadership jobs. I think that's what people are worried about, that, at the end, when you're a bit older, you need to become a team leader or you need to be a manager. But, some people just don't respond to that. So I think that's really important. And it's important to know if it's right for you to begin with. It's also quite different to a typical job in that, you wear a lot of hats. I always, you're a leader, yes, but you're also, a creative, a therapist, a motivational speaker, a nanny, a friend. You're kind of all of these things in one role. And, one day I could be presenting work, another day I could be dealing with a kind of personal issue with a team member, another day I could be, working on a project that isn't going very well. Another day I could be helping somebody that's not, that just can't come up with an idea, or they've got a creative block. So it's kind of like every day is quite different. And I think you need to go into a sort of management or a leadership role knowing that, it's not going to be the same as your day to day, where it's heads down, you're working on a project, you do that for the day, and then you shut your laptop and that's your day done. It's kind of every day is quite different. And, when you've got a fairly big team, I've got a team of about 7 or 8, which isn't a lot, but, that's almost like the optimum number for a team that should be managed. And, it becomes quite a handful when there's sort of grenades going off here and there, and I've got to go and fight that fire, and I've got to worry about this, and I've got a presentation tomorrow, and this, that, and the other. It does become quite, but that's part of the territory, right? That's part of the excitement, and that's actually what I really like about it. And I think the biggest thing is that I really care. I kind of care deeply about the people in my team. I care about their development. I care about them as a person, but I also care very deeply about the work. So I'm also aware that there's responsibilities that I need to be a kind of catalyst for growth. So I've got to stay across the work. I've got to make sure it's good. I've got to make sure that they're answering the brief and doing what they're asked. But I like to think that I'm kind of soft on the people but hard on the work. I think that's what I like to have, that balance. People feel safe and in a trusted environment that's quite open and honest, but I'm also expecting everybody to do their job and to do it as well as they possibly can. So being soft on the people is not necessarily being soft. It's caring about the people, and also being hard on the work isn't necessarily being hard. It's just caring about the work, right? So I think that's kind of my leadership style, is that I really care deeply about the people, and I care deeply about the work that's produced. And I also see it as a kind of 50-50. It's kind of half project management and half people management. So it's an exciting job, and I think I didn't know whether I would like being a sort of team leader, and I think you don't really know unless you throw yourself in the deep end. Because when I became head of design, what was it, about 10 or 11 years ago, at one London-based agency, I'd never done that before. So I came on board, and there was a big team that I was leading. I had to get to know everyone. I had to understand what they were capable of. I had to run projects, and it's only over time that you realize whether you love it or not. And I think sometimes you've just got to put yourself in that hard position to understand that. And also, when I started as a team leader, I had massive imposter syndrome. I know that's a kind of term that's flown around quite a lot, but I was a bit like, there's all these people that are quite a lot older than me, and I'm telling them what to do, and I don't know why are they listening, but why should they listen to me? But actually, I had a better handle on managing the project and managing them as people, and what they're capable of, and getting the best out of the project. And you quickly realize that actually, if you are adding to that team, and you're a benefit, and you're not holding them back, and you're not micromanaging them, you're supporting them, and you're pushing them and developing them, then you quickly realize that actually it's a great position to have, and I love it personally.
The people who chose you as a leader, they knew that you really loved growing people and you could handle lots of verticals. That's how I choose our leaders here. And yeah, it's a tough job. It's a very tough job. Not many people realize that, but at the same time, it's lots of fun if you really want to grow the people, and you have something in your imagination and you want to play it along, and that you're the one who's taking the decision. It's a great way, Peter. Yeah.
It's really rewarding. And it's when I had, over the years, I've had sort of best newcomer nominees for people in my team, and just kind of seeing that is kind of more fulfilling than winning awards for yourself, because you just feel like you're giving something back, and you're kind of growing other people. So yeah, it's a really rewarding job as well, if you kind of use it to develop people, and you care about the people, and you care about the work.
Absolutely. Peter, if at this time there are lots of small, medium enterprises, you build brands for like big enterprises, but if there are like small, medium enterprises just like us who want to have their say in the market, who have a very good leadership, who care a lot about their work, but their brand is not built as of yet. They don't know how to build that brand. Do you have insights? Do you want to like give your advice? How should small, medium enterprises come up and build their brands? Where should they start Do they start with the social media, online platform, or do they start with offline? How do they get to people?
I mean, I think the first thing to do is to establish, like I've mentioned before, just establish a really confident visual identity, and understand that it's more than just a logo. It's that you're kind of trying to build an emotional connection, or you're trying to build loyalty and trust, and build an audience. So I think if smaller businesses go through a bit of a process of kind of truly understanding who they are as a brand, build that brand toolkit and then use those consistently. So I guess it's then how you use those sort of branding tools across social media. I think social media is so important these days. It needs to be digital first. The role of online presence is critical, and providing that platform to connect with your audience and sharing your voice and your story. But I think we come back to that idea of consistency, where if you keep on changing what you stand for and what you look like and how you present yourself, then people are just going to see a different brand, a different personality, a different identity every single time. So I think as soon as you establish what your identity is, you then just need to really confidently put that out into the world, because it's the backbone of effective branding. It's building recognition, it's building trust, it's making it easier for your audience to choose you over competitors. And you mentioned storytelling earlier, and I think that stories have the ability to engage, inspire, and humanize your brand. And I think it is that kind of emotional bond with your audience that really helps establish yourself and engage with the audience. So I'm also very aware that storytelling is quite a generic term, right? It's kind of like, how do I tell stories through my brand? I think it's just it's finding what's your point of view. Are you a geek about a certain thing, and are you just willing to kind of talk very openly about your passions and what you can offer? And I think in this day and age, transparency and honesty goes a long way. It's kind of, if you just come across as a generic brand, people are not going to have that emotional bond with you. They're not going to want to return and consume your content as much. If there's something that interests them or kind of moves them, even, we're humans. We're going to want to experience that more and more and kind of form that connection. So I think it's, there's a lot of new brands and new startups that just think, oh, I'll get a logo. I've got a URL. We're going to take over the world. And that's not the way it is. You kind of really need to care and foster that brand. And, you also need to evolve as your business grows, and adapt to the change in the markets. Listen to your customers and stay true to your core values. But it's all about that long-term success and that long-term brand building. So it's essentially, establish those brand fundamentals, a really confident identity, understand what you want to say to your target audience, do that consistently, and then continue to build that in the long term.
Right. Airbnb has been doing it. They were all about performance marketing. They were spending about $2 billion a year only on performance marketing.
Wow.
And booking.com was doing it, is still doing it as well. But then
Yeah.
Airbnb thought, like, as COVID happened, it thought that, what kind of brand are we building? What's the story we are telling? So they started connecting people through their story, and now their performance marketing expenses have come quite down. Many people connect to Airbnb more and more than booking.com or hotels or any other places. So yes, storytelling is a huge part of it.
Absolutely. And actually Airbnb is an example that I always come back to, because they rebranded 10 years or so. I think it was Design Studio that did it, and I was very aware of that, and that was all based around storytelling. It was about people, it was about places. Every part of that brand was developed with storytelling and adventures and new experiences in mind. So I think Airbnb are a really good example of how, and again, like you say, they pivoted during COVID. They looked at how they could change things, and they're very good at adapting and sort of transforming.
Yeah, that's a part of brand building that you have to adapt quickly.
Yeah.
So finally, we can discuss something, we can brainstorm on something together, and maybe we can. So we go to Amazon UK, and we see that Amazon provides their API where we can see, how many people search for things. So just for example, if we want to go into the business of clothing, and let's say a particular clothing, like say woolens for men, and we see that there is a market between 50 pounds to 70 pounds where people are searching for something, but they're not quite finding it. And both of us come up with the plan that let's fill that gap in the industry. How would we create a brand? Of course, we can choose a name, but then, how do we associate colors with woolen things for men? And yeah, what should we do? What should be the process?
Yeah, I mean, I think what you would need to do is really understand. So it sounds like what you've described there. There's a kind of there's a need, and there's an idea of what you want to sell. I guess the next important thing is, who are you selling to? Obviously you said this is for men, but what age group buying those sort of things? Who's the target market for that? And then I guess from that, if you actually find the target market that you want to talk to, there needs to be a bit of research into where do they show up? Where are they looking? Where are they spending their time? And I think it's probably, if we're talking about men in their 40s, chances are they're going to be spending a lot of their time on social media. So, it'd be doubling down on social media. Then it would be the question of have we got a brand that's suitable for this product? Like, should we create a sub brand that kind of sells just wool based menswear? And then I mean, I suppose in terms of color, again, that becomes when you start to look at brand assets and kind of how you would build a brand identity. Color is a really tricky thing. I think every single brand project I have worked on, color has always been the biggest discussion point. And I think it's because it is so subjective. I think some people, respond to different colors in different ways. And
Can it be
but
white and red? Because it's winter time when we wear woolens, we want something fiery, maybe we
yeah,
remember red with fire. Can it be white and red?
absolutely. I mean, but maybe that's the USP, right? It's kind of, if that's the case, then there would be a range of reds and oranges and yellows. It's all about bringing warmth to winter, for example. Like that could be your slogan. It's all about bringing, but again, that's your unique selling point. You're sort of positioning yourself as bringing a bit of brightness to a time that's usually very dark and drab and cold. It's lightening up your day essentially. So I think even these discussions, this is a fictional brand we're talking about, but even if we're just talking about those small little nuances that make it distinctive, that instantly is starting to form a brand identity or a visual identity, which you can then create a bit of foundations to build a brand on. But yeah, I think things like color, we've already discussed that. That's where those answers come from. They come from discussion around what are you standing for? What's the purpose of this range of clothes? So I think it's when it comes to brand building, it's all about interrogating and digging deeper and understanding as deeply as you can what that brand is, what it's going to offer, why people are going to care about it. Because at the end of the day, if they don't care about it, or if there are thousands of competitors in the world, then you're just going to become the same as everything else. You're going to be swimming in the sea of sameness, which is never good for any brand. So it's finding that distinctiveness and finding that real unique selling point,
Connection.
connection around the business. Exactly. I mean, I can already imagine a clothing range in winter that's all about bringing color and brightness to other people's day, you know? So I think it's all about talking about why you exist in the world.
Great. One last thing. What advice would you give to a kid who is 18 years old and looking at this industry and says that I want to become that person like Peter, I want to come into branding industry and I want to be associated with so many things that people might connect to? What should be the personality traits of that person? Naturally curious or social, or want to make their mark into connecting things? What advice would you give to someone like that?
Yeah, I think it's of course it's being curious, it's being creative. I think, if I'm talking to people that want to come into the industry, although what we do sounds quite fun, it's a hell of a lot of hard work. There's a lot of graft, there's a lot of hours. You've got to manage stakeholders, you've got to manage teammates, you've got to manage a lot of things. So I think the best thing to do is to learn the fundamentals. So if you're going into any line of work, study your craft, learn your craft. And if you really want to take it seriously, then put in those hours to kind of, I always say, learn the fundamentals. That's the main thing, right? I even go to my team and say, right, should we do a course about design fundamentals, just to kind of remind ourselves of, the actual standards and the fundamentals that we need to do just daily anyway. So I would say, study the craft and really learn it and enjoy that process. I would also say preparation is critical. They say fail to prepare is preparing to fail. And I think, preparation with anything in life is so important.
Yeah.
A lot of people try and wing it, and they kind of turn up to interviews and they turn up to any sort of opportunity and just hope for the best. But I think, if you prepare and you know what you're talking about and you know what you want, then only good things can come from that, right? And if they don't come from it, you've tried your best. Like, you'll have no regrets because you've prepared and you've tried your best. So you won't come out of that situation and go, oh damn, I wish I'd done that, or I wish I'd read that. If you prepare as much as you can, then hopefully you will go far. I would also say, build a good portfolio of work. Obviously in the world of creative, we're fortunate in that we have these tangible things that we can present and we can dig a bit deeper in and show passion for. We can have a portfolio of work that is rich and distinctive and creative. I find it quite interesting that someone that works in finance, for example, they could be an incredible mathematician and be amazing at their work, but obviously they've got a CV of amazing jobs that they've been in, but they don't have like a portfolio of work like a creative person does. And I think building that portfolio that really expresses who you are and what you're capable of is really important. And I think the other thing, even as a student and going into the industry, build a good reputation, build a good portfolio of work, but also build a good reputation, because sometimes your reputation precedes you, and it's, you need to be known as being, helpful and hardworking, but also just
Right.
a nice person.
Nice
Like,
person.
we're in a collaborative industry, right? We have to work more and more, and even through remote working, we start collaborating with more and more people. And I think building a reputation and being a decent person and a decent colleague and a decent teammate is really, really important. So the work and the reputation is really important. And I'd go back to the mentality of sort of never growing up. I think don't lose that childlike enthusiasm and imagination. And I think if you kind of approach work in that way, it first of all becomes enjoyable, and second of all, it just gives you that freedom to do some great work. Hopefully go far in your career.
Absolutely right. Thank you, Peter. Thank you very much. Thank you for coming on this. We did some really good questions and really amazing answers by you. Thank you very much.
Yeah, no, it's great. Thank you so much for your time. It was great to connect with you and have this discussion. So thank you.
That has been a great conversation, right? You enjoyed it. I hope you got a lot out of it and see how the Mind of a Master works. Now remember that at the start of the podcast I mentioned that Peter has been kind enough to create a case study for us. Look at it. There's a link below and the description, and please go through it. I'm sure you'll thoroughly enjoy it. Thank you.